On this podcast, I have Will Hinkson, and Will has an unbelievably impressive resume next to his name. He is a Special Forces veteran, and he's also built a couple of very successful businesses that were acquired, businesses that he built after he retired from the military, that he sold for a very juicy amount. And even though he stacks that up to luck, there are an awful lot of lessons to be learned off his experiences that we go through. He's also been the CEO as well as a part owner of some very big companies that you definitely would have heard of. But following that, we go into some really specific and tactical information about being in sales. And he covers a lot of the areas that most people struggle with, a lot of the roadblocks most people hit, and strategies to get through them if you're there or bypass them if you're before that. But full disclosure, we spend about the first 16 and a half to 17 minutes talking about Muay Thai, Jiu Jitsu, and boxing. And that's something that we're both very passionate about. So if you want to sit through that, absolutely you can. But if that doesn't interest you and you just want to get into the good sales stuff, then skip to about 16 and a half minutes.
And we're back.
There we go. There we go. So you've been doing it about 4 months. Are you mainly gi or no gi?
I like no-gi better, but what I found out very quickly on Saturday is that you're just going to get a bunch of people that are wrestlers. So you just get a bunch of really good wrestlers, which is great. But I feel like it's because I've got a military special operations background, and I feel like that translates over better with just movement and everything else. And the majority of my skill set is boxing. So this was mainly because my daughter, who's about to be 5, was like, "Oh, Dad, I want to box like you," and I was like, "No,
No, not gonna happen.
no." And so immediately I was like, "I'll go to jujitsu for a few months, see if she's into it. If she is, I'll sign her up." And that's what we've been doing. So now we kind of do it together, which is great.
Yeah. So the gym that I'm at, they're very, very good on front headlocks, guillotines, darces, anacondas. Uh,
Yep.
so the thing that I noticed is, so I'm obviously in Australia, very Australian, you can tell. The thing that I noticed is I spend a little bit of time over in Guatemala, and there's a gym that I go to in Antigua, and they're all Americans and wrestlers. And wrestlers aren't used to having to protect their neck. And
Right.
whereas in my gym, if I want to land a front headlock, everyone's defense is so good because everyone's offense is so good. You
Yep.
have to set it up. So, and whereas the wrestlers, they just kept giving me their necks and I just kept getting arm in guillotines and anacondas. And I just kept thinking like, what's going on here? I think it's that wrestling. They're not worried about that, so they're going in for their double. And don't get me wrong, I got steamrolled by by a bunch of them because that was so much better.
Yeah, I caught actually 2 guys in a guillotine on Saturday
Yeah,
because that's my go-to. It's like if I can get the
yeah.
neck, even if I can just break it down, I'm willing to kind of go for it and essentially pull guard, but take him into a half guard, go on the side, and just let me clean this up, and there we go.
So, and whereabouts in America are you?
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin. Yeah. So if I ever make it over there, I'll come to whatever gym you're at and we'll have a session because the front headlock system that we use at the gym, it is ridiculous. So no matter where they are, so from basically you've got your anacondas, your armor cross guillotines, and you've got your kind of the cow catcher, which is a wrestling move that basically my coach has weaponized. And then you
Okay.
come through and you've got your arm in guillotine, you've got the high elbow, which is John Danaher's, and you've got the high
Yep.
wrist. And then if they manage to grab a grip, you go all the way through for a darce and flip over from there. Doesn't matter. Like as soon as I can grip my hands, basically in the anaconda grip from front headlock, there are
Yep.
so many weapons you have there. And then even that, the back take system from there, one thing I've started doing because everyone is so good at defense is I switch back around from basically that kind of like hip ride with the left foot over their back leg as a lever and the right
Yep.
foot kind of in the pocket here, switch back around and then end up rolling over to a mounted armor cross guillotine.
Ah, yeah. Nice.
Yeah. That's all I can hit at the moment. But then other
Oh,
people
bro,
from
I'm
other
not good at
gyms.
this. I thank God I'm athletic Thank God I'm athletic. Like the boxing, what I've noticed is even really good wrestlers have a harder time because I'm very upright because everything is here and they're
Yeah.
not used to fast arms. And
Yeah.
so, especially, I saw you post on Facebook right before I hopped on here, but when they go down and then they're looking to come up, I still can beat them. But the
Yeah.
second that they tie up with me, I'm like, you're better than me. You're
Yeah.
so much better than me.
So I'm the opposite. So I'm about in pounds, what would it be? 220 ish, 215.
Yep.
Um, I'm not that fast, and I'm aware that everything I do is just slow and crush. And I don't aim to be faster than them. I aim to make them slower than me. So
Yeah, nice.
stand up as soon as they start. When they like the down, they touch the ground and they dip in.
Yep.
As soon as I see that, I'm like, man, can you just tie up with me? As soon as they tie up, I'm good. Because there's like a lot of like stand up grappling and even the Thai clinch and pummeling and everything like that. I
Yep.
love that. That's but as soon as we have distance, here we go. Come on, just make contact and let's go from there.
I like that. It's funny. I'm not good at the distance yet because boxing distance and jujitsu distance are dramatically different things.
Mm,
And so I keep either coming in too short, like I'm going to throw a hook,
mm,
or I'm so far out, I'm out of range and there's nothing to do. And I'm just like, yeah.
mm.
But it's hilarious. Especially the first like month, probably 2 months, there's so much head movement. And so I'm used to coming in and I was like, oh, this is doing nothing. They're just kind of calmly there. And I'm like, I'm just tiring myself out. I just gotta chill out here, I guess.
Yeah. Well, that'll be handy with the head movement specifically when you do tie up and you'll start to go for your Russian ties and your arm drags. That will be
Yep.
convenient because you're really good on your feet. You're comfortable with the head movement. So most people, when they're trying to strip a like a grip, they're just like try and pull across. Whereas you see
Yes.
boxers, they're really good at understanding that movement in their body and footwork. They can do that sort of stuff a lot better. So it is an advantage.
That's where I noticed crossbody sweeps. I'm like, oh, the movement patterns I know. Like I'm not actually good at this yet, but some of the movement patterns translate. So that's cool.
Mm, mm. My coach taught us something after he did it to us for a long time. So it's basically from seated butterfly, and if you get a grip, he'll pull the arm across, pull the weight back, and he basically kicks you with his hooks. But he'll kick his right hook
Ah,
first, and you will do a spin in the
so you
air.
would go up and over.
No, no. So he doesn't spin that way. He kicks the right hook, and because your arm is dragged across, your body will basically just do a 180-degree spin, and he lands directly in back control. And the first couple of times it happens, you're like, "What was that?
So he's
What?"
doing a scissor sweep in the air, essentially, right?
Oh, kind of. So basically, if you're in, it's seated butterfly. So
Yep.
you're sitting down in guard like this,
Hmm.
and he's going to basically you grab your grip. He's going to strip that across, and then because he can take the weight of you like this, your weight all then comes onto basically his butterfly hooks, which are here, and then all he has to do is basically kick one and push this at the same time, and your body kind of just spins around, and he lands on your back, and it's first time it happens, you just that's disrespectful. You should not be able to do that.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep. There's so much of that. It's fun though.
yeah.
What I like about it is what I noticed. I picked up boxing, I mean, years ago, but relatively quick. And I'm like, oh, you're just not even remote. You're just bad at this for like a year. It's just learning how not to be bad. Like I
Yeah.
can see the pathway. It's like I've just got to put in the time and the work.
Mm.
Like that's cool.
I think that's one thing that's a parallel I did between sales and anything striking or even jujitsu, in that there are two elements. So you've got the technical side of I learned this new skill, but then there's also the side of I need to suck at this and get past that massive discomfort, because even when the first time you spar, just you're just flinching the whole
Yeah.
time, like, oh my god, this sucks. And then you slowly start to move and protect yourself. You're like, oh, okay. But you get past that fight or flight response.
Hmm.
But the worst part about that is that if you take some time off striking for any reason, it's a perishable skill.
Yep. It's funny. I'm getting slightly less bad at jujitsu, and I'm also don't have as much time to box. So I'm sparring maybe once a week right now, but nowhere near where I was. And I'm
Mm.
like, oh, I'm getting both worse at boxing and I'm not good enough at jujitsu yet to be good. I'm like, ugh, it's going to be a solid 6 months of just having to be okay with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
But fight
I
camp
so
starts in August, so I got to fight in November 8th.
November 8th.
Yeah, for boxing.
Nice. Nice. Whereabouts is that?
So that'll actually be here in Madison, which will be great. So don't have to travel for it, which is not the usual.
Do you have to cut much for it?
No. So I typically fight heavyweight. So I live right around 192 to 196 any given day.
Is 190.
Uh,
Hang on. What's heavyweight in boxing?
200 pounds is heavyweight.
Whew. And then, but you've got divisions past that, super heavyweight.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Because there's some big boys out there.
Yeah. You look at Deontay Wilder, Anthony Joshua, even Francis Ngannou, those kind of guys. I can't imagine them fighting someone that's 200 pounds.
No, what's funny is last year I took a fight at heavyweight, and for amateur, you can have a 15-pound difference. So I had to,
15.
yeah, I had to eat my way up to be able to make I was within 12 pounds. So I was like 188. But the guy
15
cut down.
pounds is so much.
Not only is it so much, but the guy cut down from 228 to be able to make 200. And so that was my first fight where I was like, I've got pretty heavy hands. I'm pretty fast. I've got power just because I've trained my whole life. Right. And I was like, oh, this is a problem. And so I was like, I have to get pretty strict with nutrition. No more eating my way up to there. Like I need to live at like pretty close to 195, 200. Otherwise I can't fight somebody like, I ended up winning, but it was pure technique. And I caught him luckily with a left hook and he went down. But I was like, I don't know. That fight could have gone either way if he would have not gone down. So that's kind of where I live now.
Whoa. There's that. So that I've always been a big boy in the gyms that I've gone to. And there's
Yeah.
kind of a bit of a running joke in our gym, the big boys and the little boys. So I've always been the bigger guy, like usually the top one or two.
Yep.
The gym I'm in, there are three guys that are, I'll put this in pounds.
I can convert. I did weightlifting, Olympic weightlifting for a while. So everything there is kilos. I usually can convert it pretty quick.
So there's three guys that are between 118 and 120 kilos.
Yeah.
And they're such lovely guys. One of them, 18 months in, he got bronze at ADCC trials.
Woo. Woo.
Just athletic, gifted. And the thing is, he's Ferdinand the Bull, just relaxed, calm. He'll be sitting there, and Justin, the coach, will be teaching some things, and he'll just be kind of looking at the mat, playing with a little bit of fluff. And then Justin will say to him, did you get that? He'll be like, yeah. And he'll do it perfectly the first time. And one of the other guys, he's 6'4", and he's 119, which is like 260 pounds.
Yep.
Shredded. I mean, just no fat on him whatsoever. So unbelievably strong. And he was really rigid for a while, so you could kind of tip him over. Whereas now, not even close. And the other guy is, what is he, 4 or 5-0 in MMA, and he's unbelievably good. But then what keeps happening is now it's the big boy gym. So we've got another guy that's 6'5", and another guy that's about 6'3".
That's not going to get easier, man. That's not going to get easier.
And I'm the little big guy. So they're the kind of guys that I roll with. And that weight difference, so it's about 20, 22 kilos.
Oh, that's legit.
With the athleticism, makes you work.
Yeah, we have a few pro boxers on the team. And like, I'm a good amateur, but I'm not a pro.
Yeah.
And you start to realize the levels to the game. And so coming into my last fight, which has been 6 months now, almost 7. Um, my coach, who's just a legend, she's like, yeah, you're just going to train with the pros. And it was as if I was starting over again. And I was just like, oh, I'm surviving in here now. Like I
Yeah.
maybe I'll land 3 or 4 combos in 4 or 5 rounds. And it's just like, yeah, they're good. Like it's cool. It's cool.
Yeah.
So, but fun stuff, super fun stuff.
Yeah. The again, I've trained with pro Thai fighters, but probably not to the kind of level, international, maybe some international champions. But the majority of the people in the gym were, they were amateurs, had a few fights, and you start to feel, get some patterns, everything like that. And then you'll pair up with any of the guys that are actually pros, and you
Yeah.
don't know where they're hitting you from. You just, and it's demoralizing in that you're just constantly getting punched, and I don't know where it's coming, and then you're like, oh, okay, all right, I just got kicked. And you go to even just throw little kicks, and they're checking, and they're probably
Yep.
even thinking about what they're getting at the supermarket on the way home. It's just cat and mouse
Oh,
playing.
dude. Yeah.
Yeah.
My catching counter is really good. Like I set everything up with just counter jab. And
Mm,
it's with those guys, it's like, good luck. Good luck. It's like, it's just not happening because
mm,
they're so solid. It's like, all right,
mm.
cool. Well, I don't have that. It's like normally I'm pretty good at cutting off the ring. They're better. It's like I don't
Yeah.
have that. It's like, all right, cool. I'm playing a lot of defense and I'm just getting very comfortable at here and then just trying to get something in.
Yeah. Yeah. Surviving is the victory.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, should we talk sales?
Yes. Well, you know what? Uh, I did a bit of research on you,
Huh.
and you have a list. All right. So you've done, and correct me if I'm wrong with any of these. So
Okay.
you've done 9 combat tours.
Yep.
You were the CEO of Sales Sniper, and you were a partner in Seventh.
Mm-hmm.
You've owned and ran a bunch of gyms, and you built an insurance team of 150.
180 when I stepped out of the day to day.
180. Yeah. And is it correct that you've done a million in comms in 1 year in sales?
Yep.
Over what time period is that?
So let's see. I left the military. That would have been end of 2013.
Mm.
So 11 years now.
So you've done all of that, excluding the military, in 11 years.
Mm-hmm.
What was the transition like for you going from, no, that's not the right question. What's the carryover for you from leaving the military, and how did you go about transitioning and applying those sort of things that you learned into that 11-year list?
Way less than I thought that actually transferred and carried over. So I had, whatever, I was doing pretty well. I had a very good reputation in the special operations community. And so I built that up. I thought it was going to translate over way better. When I was done with that career, I was truly done with that career.
Mm,
And I was like, well, I don't really have any transferable skills at this stage. It's like, cool, I'm very good at going to combat and leading special operations to teams. Who's going to hire that? And so I was like, the one thing I'm really good at outside of that is training people.
mm,
I'm very good at that. I've been, for whatever this is worth, competing in CrossFit. I'd done pretty well there. And I was like, I could do that. And so that's why I opened up a gym, is because that's the only other thing I really knew at that stage.
mm.
I'll tell you what's dramatically different is training 20-year-olds that want to be Instagram famous. And like, that's your whole staff for very seasoned special operations guys.
Yeah.
It was a complete culture shock to me. And anybody that's ever owned a gym, especially smaller gyms, if I say the 9:30, 10:30 class, they know exactly what that looks like. So all of a sudden, I went from like this kind of special operations dude into like I'm dealing with like really upset housewives that kind of have too
Mm,
much money and time on their hands. And there were some great ones as well, but like are very loud about stuff that seem very small to me. And I'm
mm,
dealing with all this stuff. So it was kind of a little bit of a culture shock, if I'm honest. But to
mm,
answer your question, The thing that really translated for me was, now retrospectively looking back, which I couldn't possibly recognize in the moment, was persistence. Like
Mm.
that translated. Like I'll figure it out. Like I'm really uncomfortable because I haven't done this before. And there was no indication I was going to be successful at it other than stubbornness. And that was enough to carry me through. And so
Mm.
that was the piece that set up the foundation for all the things that came later.
Mm. So even though you're not sure if you're doing exactly the right thing, you're going to stay persistent with what you do, and you know that the clarity will come.
Yeah, I don't know who it's attributed to. I've looked and I can't find it, but one of my favorite quotes of all time is go as far as you can see and then you'll see farther. And that's something that I am pretty good at.
I like that. I haven't heard that before. Go as far as you can see, and then you can see farther.
Yeah. And that's probably a pretty good summary of my life up to this stage.
Mm. So you left the military, you started running gyms, and you started dealing with people that have what are they, first world problems. I need more
Very much so.
followers. I'm not happy with. So in that time, I actually worked in a gym in sales for a couple of years, and it was probably around exactly the same time. And I still remember the kind of people that came through, the kind of things that they would talk about, and it was their therapy in a way, and you would have your people coming through doing exactly that. But I feel like now the people wanting to be an influencer, particularly a fitness influencer, I feel like that would be a lot bigger than it was then.
Yeah, I mean, it was just coming about, right? So, like, we started out, especially the first location was very CrossFit heavy. That was where I was
Mm,
competing. It had translated so well to the special operations community. You know, longevity, there's an argument it's not good there, and I would probably agree with that. It's not the way I train now, but all of these people wanted to be like CrossFit famous, which is a
mm,
very specific thing. It's kind of a weird thing. Um, and so it's just odd, man, because I've got all my staff and they're like minus two people. They were just 20-year-old trainers that wanted to be
mm,
like fitness famous. And that's a
mm.
weird audience to build a mission and a culture and grow a business with. And that was a real thing. Like that's a real thing.
I didn't know that CrossFit Famous was a thing until the weekend, as in 2 days ago. And I was at a friend's birthday. We were watching the UFC at a bar, and I saw one of the young guys that I used to train with at the Thai gym, and he was a very good fighter. And he left, and he's been doing a lot of CrossFit. And he said, "Yeah, I'm just kind of trying to build a brand for myself in CrossFit." And I was still thinking about it. I don't understand the CrossFit world. It's never really ticked my box in that longevity. You see a lot of people getting injured. Uh,
Yep.
the brand in CrossFit, as in, so it's a community, and you become popular and you sell courses, programs, trainings that way, or
There we go. We caught back up. Um, yeah, I mean, so they've got a competition that used to be, I don't know where it sits. It kind of like waxed and waned in popularity, but at its peak, at least when I was part of it, it was a big thing. So you compete. If you qualify, then you go to, back then it was sectionals and then regionals, and then you
mm,
go to the games. And so you have to make these times, you have to make the weights, you have to do all of these things. And then all of a sudden you're like kind of the person, which I've
mm,
never been that comfortable with.
mm,
Um, which is probably why I don't have a big brand now. But like that was
mm,
a thing back back then, and it's probably even more so now because there's
mm,
more dollars in it. And so if you build a name for yourself, then one of the big brands will sponsor you. And usually it starts out with you get some free gear, you get some trips, and then it moves to dollars. And there's
mm,
quite a few dollars that are going through that brand for both the influencers as well as sponsors and everything else. And so that is a real pathway to be able to be fair, to make good money and just do what you enjoy doing. I don't know how long term that is, but it's probably really good for somebody that's 20 to 25 and
yeah.
just looking to enjoy their life and do what they love.
Mm. So how did you take the step from that to what came next? Because that seems like you had a couple of gyms, things were going
Yep.
well.
Yeah, that was a wild one, man. So,
Mm,
really weird set of circumstances that led to this. but a private equity or a private equity firm had reached out to buy the gym, and they said, "Hey, we're interested." Basically, which is weird. Nobody does that. Like no private. We were the number one boutique gym in the space, like in the town that I was in, Ann Arbor, Michigan, and they had a concept from like our biggest competitor there. And so they were like, cool, we can take this nationwide. They had equipment. They were like, they thought they were going to be the new Orange Theory, the new F-45, right?
Mm.
And so they're like, cool. The plan is we own Ann Arbor first, and then we expand out from there. And they did everything they could to try to beat us. But I was just very good at on the ground marketing. So getting out in the community, events, getting out there, talking to people, all of the stuff, which was exhausting, but it worked really well. And so they finally just said, we'd like to buy you. And they would have steamrolled me, absolutely steamrolled me. But my brother-in-law, which was not my brother-in-law back then, it was just my girlfriend's brother, was at the time, the top mergers and acquisitions attorney for SaaS companies in Chicago.
Yep.
And I was telling Nicole, my wife, and she's like, you should call Aaron. I was like, okay. So I called Aaron and he's like, cool. Still probably his worst client to date, but he walked me through the whole process of selling that, doing all that stuff. Then from there, I didn't really know what I was going to do. Had a decent exit for a gym, nothing crazy, but I was set up for the next kind of 2 years if I wanted to. I had a marketing company reach out that does production. So produces documentaries, all this stuff. I had worked with them on a documentary for a nonprofit I help out with. And they were like, hey, we're looking for a CRO, a chief revenue officer, somebody who comes in, do biz dev. We like you. We love what you've done. Would you consider it? And so I was like, yeah, but probably not for what you guys are looking to pay. And they were like, well, what about equity? And they set kind of some high gates that I had to hit. And so went through, hit those gates, which was great. My equity vested. And then again, pure dumb luck, they got an offer from a much bigger production company. And so I found myself in a position of having another exit, but a little less than a year and a half after my first one. And so then I was sitting in a pretty good position. And it was kind of like, where do I go from here? Hopefully the story isn't boring all the listeners, so I'll give you the abridged version.
I'm noticing a pattern of luck and acquisitions.
Yeah. So what I'm pretty good at is finding, I'd say the entrepreneurial pieces of like being able to grow something relatively quickly, but also I typically don't go so fast that I can't build the structure to support it. And so that tends to be stable revenue ends up being something that is very, now I understand this much better, but it's very attractive to private equity because it's usually not contingent. The gym was, but it's the rest of the stuff is not really contingent on me. And so you're acquiring stable revenue, whether it's a bolt on to one of the existing platform companies, or they're looking to make it a platform company. And so that's a very solid thing. And in general, in the industry, I just kind of get out there and meet people. Like I think at the end of the day, like the underrated skill for most is like, just get out there and talk to people. Like just people are cool. Everybody's got a great story. Like it doesn't have to be about you or signing them right away. It's like, just have a good conversation with people. And that tends to lead to a bunch of other good conversations.
With that as well, the thing that I notice is if you go in very one track mind, I'm going to sign this person on this, everything that you see, I don't know if confirmation bias is the right word, but everything you see is like, yes, that person is a fit for this. Whereas, like you said, if you go in, we're just going to have a conversation, we're going to connect, all of these possibilities open up. And most of the time you'll find it probably didn't end up where you thought it would, but a whole lot more things come from it. But if you get stuck on that, this is the only outcome of this conversation, you miss out on a lot of opportunities.
Yeah, especially in business. Like it's different if you're a full-time sales rep. Like that's a different game, right? But if you're in business development, business in general, I would say even to a certain extent in like enterprise, complex, larger company selling, man, it's like to think that that's not relational and your reputation isn't going to carry, like it's going to one way or the other. And so if you're trying to sell everybody all the time, you're just a very transactional person. And that is not usually who people want to work with.
I go to a cafe a few mornings a week and I write content, newsletters, and just get out of this zone because this is the do get things done space.
Yeah.
And the thing that I noticed is nearly every time an account manager or sales rep or business owner will sit down with a potential client and you hear the conversations, and maybe it's the advantage of having been on a lot of calls, or maybe it's being separate from their conversation. But I hear all of these things, all of these possibilities on where that conversation could go, or the kind of things that they could do together. But they just miss everything
Yeah.
because they don't have that openness or ability to actually assess the situation as opposed to force an outcome.
Yeah, it's funny, man. There's such a big debate inside of the sales world right now of like script or no script and like all of this stuff. And
Mm,
I kind of laugh at it a little bit because it's like it's both, but understanding the timing of it. If you
mm,
don't have a process to take somebody through in the beginning, good luck
mm,
ever learning something. But on the flip side of that, if you can close your eyes and say every question on your script and understand the outcomes, you probably just need to trust yourself more and have a
mm,
decent conversation. And so it's
mm,
kind of like this progression of things. But as you just mentioned, like in the case of that cafe, it's like they probably don't even really know what they're looking for. So they
mm.
can't take somebody through a process. And they might be decent at having a conversation, but it's not relevant. It's not moving towards an outcome that makes sense. It's like there's all these things that have to happen that most people just miss.
Mm. But it's also a bit of a reflection of the space that we operate in that everyone is super educated. Everyone's gone through 1 to 2 courses, whereas you'll hear people in corporate and they just say, nah, sales is all gut feel. It's just the
Yeah.
gift of the gab. No, it's not. But the conversation about script as opposed to no script, it is an interesting one.
Yeah. It's kind of right. Like, and I'm in a really interesting position having coached at seventh level, having been a part of that, having been the first the head of sales at Sales Sniper, then the CEO, and coached so many of the top
Mm,
reps in the space, and a lot of whom have kind of splintered off and do their own training.
mm,
And I'm not to say there's anything wrong with them. I think they're very good sales reps and they're very good at what they do. But I also kind of remember where they started.
mm.
And it's like, you didn't start there, man. It's like you kind of need a process and then get really good. And they're teaching stuff that's really amazing. But it's like, it's kind of like we were talking a lot about training and everything else and fighting and all that stuff. It's like, cool. If you go and try to train with like an Olympic level judo competitor today, and you're just like, that's their training plan. That's what they do. That's what they execute. That's what I have to do. It's like, probably not, man. Like, you probably need to do what they were doing 15 years ago to
Yep.
build up that base so you can start to keep progressing to that level. You're just not ready for it yet. Like,
Mm.
you need the foundations and basics in place. And I think so many people want to rush the process. It's like,
Yep.
you just can't rush development.
You can't. You can't. And one thing that I noticed, so I completely agree in that you have to know what you're doing and understanding a process to start with. So I say follow the script, understand why each area is there, and then understand sales in a little bit more of a fundamental level of what sort of things do I need to tick off on a call? How many different ways can I ask that question, or how many different ways can I tick that off? And then the way I operate is I have a framework that I follow. I have all of these things that I know I need to tick off or go through. When I get to them, how I get to them, how I ask them will vary from person to person.
Yeah.
And I think it's either Eli Wild or Eli Sanchez. They have a saying about dance moves. So you can know 100, 200, whatever it is, dance moves, but you can't hit them all in one song. You've got to pick the ones that feel right for that moment, and that only comes with time. And you know what it's like, you're learning something new, you practice it, it's like, oh, that did not hit. We're
Yeah.
not going to do that like that. But the thing that I see, and it's a high ticket space thing because everyone is so educated on everything that they've done, they lose touch of how to speak to a person. They
Yes.
lose touch of just, oh, I was top of the leaderboard in the first two companies I was with, and now I can't even get on the board. It's just, well, what were you doing then that you weren't doing now?
Yeah.
Oh, I know all of this stuff now. So one thing that I like to say is just slow down. Remember, you're talking to a person, and and sometimes I'll do an exercise where let's actually have a conversation, and let's pretend that we hopped on the call, you and I are friends. And this is what I said, what would you do? And you see people bind up because they're thinking about all of the outcomes. But let's pretend that we weren't on a sales call. What would you do? Oh, what happened there? Oh, what's going on with work? What's happening at home? Do you want to talk about it? And then there's this glass shattering moment with everyone where they think, I've just overcooked it. I've overdone
Hmm.
it.
Yep.
Yeah. I think the more training people do, it's great, but then they separate themselves from what made them great in the beginning.
If if the tactics are creating a place where it's not a real conversation,
Mm.
you're cooked, right? Eli Wild's actually a pretty good friend. Side note, he's exactly who he appears to be. He is just a genuinely good human being. But we were talking about this because I guess kind of in theory we're competitors, but we're friends. Like, it
Mm.
doesn't really matter, right? Like most of the people in the space are actually kind of sales, or I think we're all pretty good friends at some level. There's a few,
Yeah.
but like in general. But we were talking
Yeah.
about it because we kind of developed some stuff and come into companies. And man, I think there's just so many people that are bad at sales. It's like the first level is, can you just communicate like a human being? Like that's stage
Yeah.
like 0.5. We're not even at one. And then from there, it's like, can you find a problem? From there, can you develop it and really develop it? I ended up kind of teaching these 4 stages of problem awareness, which is, I won't take everybody through the framework and bore you to death with it, but basically it's how do we develop a logical problem, get into an emotional. But I think that gets said a lot, but nobody has the framework to really do it and understand it. So I just kind of created some frames around it, and it seemed to land pretty well. But it's like, cool,
Mm.
if you can do that, you're probably better than 70% of people in sales. Like,
Yep.
and have a somewhat clear pitch. That's the next piece. If you have a somewhat clear pitch where it's relevant to the conversation, they understand what it is that they're getting, what it does, that it's for them, and they can actually understand it, like you're probably going to do pretty good. You'll probably
Mm.
close around 30, 35%.
Mm.
Like the next super level, like I don't think solution awareness, if you're able to develop a really good problem, is all that hard. It's kind of like, cool, if we solve that and took that away, what does your life look like then? What does that kind of allow you to do? What does that transform? There's
Mm.
all these pieces. And then consequence is just really going into, all right, cool. What happens if you aren't able to get to that level, right? Get that solution, and you're stuck in the
Mm.
status quo of the same problem that you're in for whatever timeline you want to pick.
Mm.
And it's like, cool. If we can get that, and most people hesitate, I'm sure you've seen this as well. People really, really struggle with consequence. They're like, well, what if I get negative feedback? It's like, ask it the right way. Don't ask what happens if your life
Mm.
sucks and you don't fix this. It's like, cool. What happens if you aren't able to get that solution, whatever you uncovered there, and you're stuck in the same, and you're stuck at 5K a month and struggling to pay the bills and in that status quo that you've been in for the last couple of years? It's like you can't really argue against that. It's like it's a lot of it is the way you phrase it, and just having a
Mm.
conversation like a human, roll into the
Mm.
pitch, handle logistical objections, tie them down the right way, get a few identity tie-ins in the right way. Then from there, I'm handling fear, or I'm living to fight another day and booking another call. That's like the basics in my
Mm.
mind. And then we've got the really advanced levels we can go into if you
Mm.
think it's helpful for the audience. But it's like, if you can't hit the basics, like, and they take some time to really learn and to nail and to land, but like, it's going to be a hard time. You're going to have a hard time in sales. You're going to wonder if it's right for you. You're going to wonder if you should go and become a client success manager instead of a sales rep because it's stable income. And you're going to look at all these things, and it's
Yep.
like you just haven't. You're trying to skip development, and it just takes time. That's all.
Yep. Yep. You hit on so much good stuff there. So much. So the high level things, absolutely, we'll get stuck into those. But I think one thing that you honed in on, and I think it needs to be reiterated, is specifically the consequence question. And you'll find most people, they just want to press on where it hurts. And it's almost hostile. Like, well, what happens if nothing happens?
Yeah.
Well, of course, anyone, if you, that's not a normal question you would ask someone. But if
No.
you reiterate to them, everything that we've just gone through, you've mentioned this and you've mentioned this and this. If we jump forward, 12, 18 months, whatever the length of the program is, and things continue on the same track, what does that reality look like? And that's the way that I phrase it. It's just, if you're painting a future reality that they maybe haven't thought about or they don't want to think about. But then there's that balance of how hard do you go when you're there? And I think everyone, not everyone, a good portion of the market have been through a lot of sales calls now, and
Yes.
they are a lot more educated. They know what's coming. They've been consequenced before. And there's that finesse of, how do I make it feel like I'm asking a genuine question as opposed to just being exactly like all of the other guys.
Yep. 100%. And I think, and I love what you're saying. It's funny. Like, obviously, I come from seventh in sales. I've done a bunch of different stuff and incorporated that over the years. But I really like NEPQ, which is a complex way of selling. Most people don't
Yeah.
think about it like that, but it's very nuanced.
Mm,
Like, it'll be harder to master NEPQ if you're just starting.
mm,
It can be worth it, but it is a harder path to get good using that methodology than it is a lot of the others. But I think, like, when you look at that, like, people get so wrapped up in what's the exact tone on the last word that I say, what exactly, like, what are my word tracks? What are all this? And that stuff's good to play with and understand. But at the end of the day, like, you got to have a real conversation with this person.
mm.
And if you're just, like, quote unquote, like, beating them up or slapping them around, it's like, you might be able to do that on a biz op offer. If you do that with anybody that's been around, God forbid you try to do that on somebody that actually has had some success in life, you're going to
Mm.
get crushed.
Yeah.
You're going to get just annihilated on
Yeah.
calls. And it's your
Yeah.
fault. Like, you have to learn how to talk to that person.
Mm. The example I give with that, you nailed it, is if you take someone like very, very successful person and all you try and do is just build pain, build pain, build pain, consequence them. In their head, like, I'm just going to go and cry in one of my Lamborghinis. Like, what? I know what you're doing, mate. Come on. And the,
Yeah.
the the kind of people that have been there, they've probably run sales teams and they've probably done a lot of sales. And to get where they are, millionaires, billionaires, whatever you want it to be, if we're thinking about that avatar, they have been through this so many more times,
Yeah.
so many more times, and you just can't get away with that stuff.
No, you also will never be the trusted advisor on the call.
Hmm.
I think one of the things I teach a lot, and I truly believe, which is you have to provide value on the call. And, like, yes, asking good questions does that. But also, like, if you want to elevate, and this is the advanced piece, if you want to elevate yourself into that trusted advisor, then you're offering something unique and usually a different way of looking at things that they're not used to. If you're just trying to keep somebody in pain, two things. One, there's sophisticated buyer. Like, if you got you or I on a sales call and somebody tries to get us to cry, it's going to be like, it's just not going to happen, man.
It's not going to happen.
It's just, there's no chance. And if you keep trying to do it 9 different ways and you go, I don't know, they were just a tough prospect. It's like, no, you were trying to take this in a place that it was never going to go.
It's never
And
going
it's
to go.
square peg round hole. But
Yeah.
the other thing is, if you do keep, and this is the other thing I see a lot, if you do keep somebody in pain for an extended period of time, you're going to get a think about it objection at the end.
Mm-hmm.
And the analogy I give to this is, like, years ago, I broke my back, and, like, legit pain, like constant pain. I wouldn't recommend it for anybody. It's not a good time. Don't do it on a Tuesday for kicks. But, like, in that, it's like you can't really think about anything but the pain.
Mm.
And so, yes, take somebody into emotion. That is very appropriate. Do that. But if you're keeping them there for longer than, like, 5-6 minutes, like, it's going to be a real problem for you, because it's going to be hard to bridge out into solution. assuming you go problem, solution. Some people do it in reverse. But like if you're bridging into solution, like you're screwed. Like that's why solution, it's got a little bit more upbeat. You're kind of like increasing the tempo of your voice. You're kind of going forth. It's got a little playfulness in it. Like you're using your hands more. It just, there has to be that sense of excitement there. Otherwise, when you go to present your solution in the presentation, like
Mm,
they're just so bummed out. Like
mm,
if you've ever been depressed or like something happened to your family or somebody died, like you just want to sit on the couch. You
mm,
don't really want to do anything.
mm.
Like they're not going to want to move forward very fast, and like you can still get that sale, but also the likelihood of refund is much higher. It's
Much
like
higher.
you have to think about all these things as you go through, and that just takes time and a lot of reps and learning from the right people to be able to understand that stuff.
Your analogy is perfect because there's no momentum in pain. And if you think about the most depressed, the saddest, the most pain you've ever been in, at no point are you thinking, oh, yeah, I can do this. I can achieve this. And I don't think people understand that pain is part of it, but pain is essentially it's an emotion. It's discomfort. It's something that they are necessarily wanting to get away from. But a big thing, and you might disagree, but a big thing I believe on sales calls is I think you need to get them to have clarity over where they are, but I think you need to get them to map out what their version of success actually looks like because people. So, what are the sayings? So, people are more motivated to um, people are motivated to escape pain and avoid future pain, but people are motivated to gain future success, but they are more motivated by the loss of future success. So if you can hit all of those markers on a call of pain now, as in a level of discomfort, a reality or an understanding that future pain is coming, a
Mhm.
goal that they themselves can picture, and then have that taken away by the realization that they can't do it themselves. They do need support and it can't get pushed out any further, and they have no one close to them that can do it. You're hitting all four of those points.
Yes.
But people focus so heavily on that first one, they miss the rest of all of those very powerful moving forces on a sales call.
Yeah. Years ago when I was in head of sales at Sales Sniper, it was it was chaos, man. So it was the
Mm,
biggest sales sniper ever was, probably ever will be. I bet I don't think Matt would mind me sharing it. Um, but like it was madness. So we had
mm,
27 accounts. At the time, I was managing all of them. When I moved into the CEO role, three people took over for me, three very talented sales managers, and they split that up because it was madness.
mm,
And I was still selling a lot at the time. And so I was trying to figure out how to manage everything. I think we had roughly 135 sales reps, all of that stuff I was still selling, but I ended up
yeah.
having to go through this exercise of like, how do I compress everything that I need to get on a sales call in a very small amount of time? Because that's all I have. It's all I have. Like I'm working 70, 80 hours a week already. Like there's quite literally no more time. It doesn't exist. And so I started playing with all these frameworks. And one of the ones I found is, and this is kind of the advanced stuff, and to your point, those four things that you mentioned, I like to do it with quick disassociated stories and then pull them
Mm,
into it. And so whenever I would get a limiting belief, and it depends on the prospect and what you're selling and all of this stuff, but usually in the beginning of the call, like first 12, 14 minutes, and in general, I was pitching, not that time matters, but I was pitching somewhere between like minute 18 and 22. I just had
mm,
to figure out ways to move people through the process faster. I just didn't have the time. And I still had to get this, like, it was so much stuff. So, one of the things I started to do is the second that I would hear a limiting belief or something that didn't serve that person, I would reframe them. But I have kind of this two camps reframe that I've used over the years that served me really well. Where let's say it's a business owner, it's kind of a standard coaching consulting offer and they're struggling, they're up and down. They think that they're 5K going on 100K. They don't really understand what the difference is. They think it's small
mm,
details and they're not ready to really address usually that it's kind of them. And so I'd go, yeah, man, I talk to a lot of business owners and like in general, like there's kind of two camps. Like the first camp is somebody, they've gone through all the training, they work really hard, they put out the offer, They're doing all the posts, they're doing everything else, and they're kind of struggling. And there's nothing wrong with that person, right? Like a lot of respect in that. But some months they're making 15K, some months they're making 1500. But on average, it's a very inconsistent 5K. Now you contrast that to camp number 2. And like when you look at those guys, they're doing a lot of the same stuff, seemingly, but they're making 50, 100K a month. And it's like, what's the difference between the two guys? Usually, and this is where it depends on what the limiting belief was that we want to address. If it's mindset and they kind of know everything, then I can address that here. If it's they don't have the right components in place or understand the nuances and difference in messaging or marketing, I can address that here, but you can kind of tailor it every time. But let's say it's the person who thinks that they're doing everything right, right? It's like when I look at that person, like seemingly it looks like they're doing the same stuff. But the truth is they're doing the things at a different level. There's different levels to this game, and they understand the difference that makes all the difference. And they know they can move forward confidently with the stuff they put out to market because it hits. And if it doesn't, they can adjust it really fast. Whereas this person, and there's nothing wrong with this person, they can live a great life. 60K a year is very respectable. But when you look at that person, they're just struggling to get traction. So I guess for you, what camp do you feel like you are kind of falling into right now? Because now they've thought about this person. They've thought about this person. They're not thinking about themselves until I usually, in somewhat, until I bring them into that last question. And now I can address it, but I can address it from a different angle. And so I kind of play with a lot. How do I create as many objectionless closes as possible? And the answer is you're still getting the objection and handling it. I'm just doing it earlier in the call. And in my experience, it's going to take 1/5 of the time to handle the objection and discovery than it does at the end.
I think because earlier in the discovery, it's a logical problem. And what you did there is you separated the person's identity, ego, and self-worth from the limiting belief itself. Whereas when you get past the pitch into the close, they know the price, that's when the panic sets in. And then that's when people are like, oh, this is a sales call. I need to make a decision. There's all of this pressure. The heart rate goes up. But what you did then, that was amazing. Just completely separated them from their problem so they could identify with it.
Yeah. And it's also hooking in their identity a little bit so we can reinforce it as needed wherever that stuff comes up on the rest of the call. So I like the really fast identity shifts because it just puts them in a better place to make a better decision at the end of the call. And that's where making sure what you're selling actually works. And is ethical matters a lot when you get good at this stuff. But it just, in my opinion, it's more fun. And that I get people, and I don't sell as much these days, but I used to get a lot of messages from people that come into programs and they get a better outcome. They absolutely get a better outcome because they're coming into it ready, as opposed to, oh my God, what if it doesn't work? And they're almost buyer's remorse, but maybe you have good client success. So they're getting them in really quick, making sure they're addressing that, doing all that stuff. I found they get better results faster and you end up getting a lot more messages of people thanking you, which is way more fun.
So Matthew, the fellow I had on the podcast last week, he's been a friend for a good while, and he has an analogy, and it's to do with pain as well as buyer's remorse. And he basically said what most people think they need to do on a sales call is imagine you have someone in water, and the water level's essentially up to here. And what most people think you need to do is just push them under, make them struggle, make them stress, and you are the only lifeline. And oh, look, we have a savior, and you pull them out and they buy. But when they get off the call, or in this analogy, they get up on the side of the pool, actually, hang on, you're the reason that I thought I was drowning.
Yeah.
And then they have that regret. That's why they refund. And then that's why they don't participate, because they came in under really forced conditions. Whereas what all of this does is you kind of give a level of clarity of the water was here, it's gone up to here. And then it's going to go up to here. And it's going to go up to here. If you feel as though you can get out by yourself, 100% you do that. But do you feel as though, no, what are my options here? I believe giving people clarity on a real problem that they can't fix themselves, I think that's how you keep a lot happier, happier clients, happier prospects. I think that's where you get the thank you messages, and by using the analogies like you did just then, you're giving them clarity over what's actually happening.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, sales is exhausting until you get decent at sales. And I think once you get the basics and you start
Mm,
utilizing, and the truth is most of it is when you understand how to hook and frame somebody's identity
mm,
relative to what their desires are, like sales becomes really fun. They're just fun, good conversations. Not everyone, you're going to get some jerks, but they're
yeah.
like 1 in 30 at that point.
Mm,
And it's like, it's much more fun to do it.
mm,
It's one of my favorite things coaching sales reps inside of our program. It's like when I know they have the basics, I can teach them how to just be them and have fun on
mm,
calls. And it's like, sweet. Now we're talking. Like now we get in there, especially for our done for you management clients. It's like we've got some incredibly talented sales reps who push hard. And what they inevitably do is they look like hard performers and high performers will look at the numbers and it's impossible not to measure yourself. I do it too. I 100% do it too.
mm,
But the thing to remember is that is just a guidepost.
mm,
It's not who you are. It's just telling you like, hey, is the actions that I'm taking, are they leading to mostly success or do I need to adjust some stuff? Everything else is how you show up on those calls. And I think a lot of people, a lot of sales reps out there are looking at their calendar, they're looking at their calls and they're going, taking a deep breath, trying to collect themselves, turning on Zoom or Google Meet and just going, oh, hey, nice to meet you. And it's like, you're just approaching it from a place that kind of sucks. And
mm.
it's going to be really hard to have longevity and sustainability inside of this career if you're dreading every time somebody hops on that call.
So, do you think a lot of the dread comes from not knowing what they have to do or what needs to happen on that call? Or do you think sometimes it's from incongruencies in what you're selling, how you're conducting yourself? What do you see the most?
I think the core of it is rejection. I think in
Mm,
sales, until you get really good, you're going to get more no's than you get yeses. And
mm,
we're all human beings. Don't get me wrong, there's some sociopaths out there, but I think 99%, like you get enough rejection, it's very hard not to take that. And I
mm,
mean, we talked a lot about fighting before this. It's like, cool, if you lose 4 fights in a row, it's real hard to go into that fifth one and feel really pumped and stoked about that.
mm,
Like that's where you have to shift the frame and go, hey, what is the positive thing that happened to me on this call, especially in the beginning, right?
mm,
Was I able to deliver that piece? Was I able to get a deep problem? Did I get an emotion, right? Was I able to reframe some fear objections or even just tie down logistical in the beginning? Was my
mm,
presentation, did it land? They understood it and they didn't have any clarifying questions because it was so clear how it solved their problems. Like there's ways to shift the way that you look at it so you're getting constant wins.
mm,
Years ago in the special operations stuff, I went through something called SEER school, which is survival, evasion, resistance, escape. They essentially train you how to, if you become a POW, how to kind of like not mentally lose your mind, which you probably will a little bit.
yeah.
This was before the days of all the Middle East stuff when POWs were a real thing. That's kind of much less a thing these days.
Mm,
But what they called is small victories. It's like, cool, you might, like in a lot of those cases, they had POWs that came out. Those guys were in like in Vietnam in as POWs in some gnarly conditions for
mm,
years. And the guys that ended up coming out okay, relatively, versus the guys that did not do okay, everybody talked about small victories,
mm,
right? Was able to get tap code, and then I got somebody back. I didn't know who it was, but I was able to communicate with another American that day,
mm,
right? I was able not to, I ended up blinking Morse code throughout this thing, even though I was being forced to say a message that I didn't believe in. Like when you have these small victories, like if you look at the extreme examples and you can translate over to something that feels big for you,
mm,
like that's where life becomes a little bit easier because you have context. And that's the hardest thing to do when you're trying to do something you've never done before is actually get context as to
mm,
what winning and losing looks like.
mm. There's another side to that as well, and that's a very intense example. I think most people, when they start in sales, they make it everything.
Yeah.
They go head first. That when they're not on sales calls, they're learning, and it's, don't get me wrong, it's such a fun time. But I tell everyone that will listen, you need to diversify your happiness and diversify your self-worth. So if you're learning sales, great, go hard at it. Start jiu-jitsu, start boxing, start Muay Thai, start CrossFit, start anything else
Yep.
where you can get some wins. And even so, if I wake up on any day, I'm going to have a win in sales. I'm going to have a win in things to do with my newsletter or YouTube. I'm going to have a win in jujitsu. I'm going to have a win lifting weights. I'm going to
Yes.
have a win hitting pads at a striking class. I'm going to have a win walking around in the sun with my dog, or I'm going to have a win in all of these other areas. So even if I have a sucky week in sales, it happens. It's fine. Even if I get tapped 7 times every round at jiu-jitsu, or I get, really, really hit at striking class. Doesn't matter because I'm having a win
Yep.
somewhere else. And I think diversifying your happiness and wins is is really important. But one final question before we go.
Yeah.
So if you were speaking to someone who was just starting out and they were trying to, like you said before, find a win in a call, you have to do the reps and get to a certain point before you can recognize those wins. But if you could give someone some insights when they're at that point of how do I start spotting wins and how do I consistently improve, what would that be?
Honesty with yourself, which will be the hardest thing in the beginning. So if your call is being recorded, listening back to your calls, which
Mm,
is terrible in the beginning because when you start out, you're thinking about what do I say? There's weird
mm,
pauses and lulls inside of it. But when you're listening to a call, and I used to do this when I ended up transitioning from running my own companies to full-time sales, my daughter was just like newborn. And
mm,
so I would pop in my headphones and then I would just go into my Zoom and then I would listen to that as I was pushing her and my dog in the stroller, waiting for my wife to get home. And so what I noticed is the easiest win on the planet is, did I show up the way that I communicate with friends in the
mm,
beginning? The middle of the calls might go a little bit off the rails, but like that first 4 or 5 minutes, like did I communicate in a way that would have been easy to conversate with? Like, would I hang out with me at a party? Because I think
mm.
most people just show up monotone and a little bit weird. And if you're at a party, you would immediately go like, "Hey man, really nice to meet you. Oh, I just saw them. I'm gonna go say hi." But really what that person is thinking, like, I want to go talk to anybody but you.
Yeah.
And so if you can just communicate like a human being and recognize that, you're going to show up way better on the rest of the calls. And
Mm,
that's the easiest win.
yeah. That's spot on. Nailed it. So just before we wrap up, where can people find you? Socials, anything like that?
Yep. I should be better on socials, but I tend to prefer running companies and training people. That being said, I'm on Facebook, Will Hinkson. I'm on Instagram, Real Will Hinkson. If you want to check out, it's a little bit more for companies, but what we're doing to kind of transform sales teams, sales environments, all that stuff, you can check out hardlyselling.com.
Amazing. Well, thanks for coming on. This was a very, very valuable session.
This was great, brother. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Will.
Take care.